Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, and the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And today we'll talk about remote and hybrid team communication and how to do better in this major area. Unfortunately, managers are not doing so well in this area. A recent FlexSauce report showed that 7 out of 10 is how much managers get. That's what the average score is for managers by their team members, which is not great. That's a C-level grade. Hybrid team leadership is a competence test. It requires new skills, different skills than managers had before, and many managers, unfortunately, are not really getting a high grade on this test. They're not adapting their managerial skills for these new modes of leadership in hybrid settings. That's why 30% of employees are frustrated. According to FlexOS report, they report being frustrated by unclear instructions from their managers. So the communication issues as a result affect both team cohesion and team efficiency. So team togetherness is how close and connected they feel, and its efficiency, how productive the team is. Now, there was a study in Nature Human Behavior which found that remote work does foster siloed communication. So there's less communication between different teams that limits information sharing. So managers need to address this by adopting communication practices that overcome silos and enhance connectivity between teams. Sometimes you even have to do it within teams, but usually it's between teams to break down those information barriers. And there was another study in Frontiers in Psychology which found that hybrid work does increase the risk of social isolation, especially for new hires. Now, the study found that managers are key for countering isolation. So managers need to practice engagement strategies that improve broad team cohesion, team morale, and address that isolation dynamic, fostering a culture of inclusion and interaction between team members. There have been a number of critical communication issues identified in hybrid settings, such as ambiguity. And so this ambiguity of messaging, where the messages are not clear, where the manager thinks she or he is communicating clearly, or team members think they're communicating clearly, but actually their instructions are unclear. We saw from the FlexOS report that over 30% of workers report their managers not having clear instructions. But clarity is paramount, and being close, nearby, in the same office doesn't necessarily even equate to clear communication. So we have some problems with clear communication even in the office, but it's more problematic, of course, when you're working remotely because you have to communicate more by text, you communicate more by asynchronous methods, and it's hard to communicate effectively using those methods unless you're being deliberate and practice having effective, clear guidelines for communication. So let's talk about how conflicting instructions cause some problems. So I'll tell you a case study from a client of mine where I was consulting on helping them have good hybrid work communication. And this was a classic case study that we got from a focus group of how bad communication had some problems. So the manager sent emails that were somewhat vague, and they led to confusion among team members. Had some mixed messaging on project priorities, saying do this, do that, and team members weren't sure what was the actual priority. So that's why employees were struggling to identify what they should focus on, and because of this lack of clear direction, they had lower morale, and thus lower productivity because there's not consistent guidance, there's lower morale, they don't know what to focus on. So that is a big problem. And this relates to what's called the availability gap, where people who are working remotely perceive most frequently that there's reduced manager support compared to them working in the office. So according to the FlexOS report, remote employees are 36% less likely than in-office counterparts to feel that their managers are accessible or that their managers are effective in building connections. So the manager's availability is seen as limited, and that distance creates serious communication challenges, and that inequality in attention is worse for remote employees. So you want to make sure as a manager to address that and put more efforts toward communicating to employees when they're working remotely that intuitively feels like you should. Now, team efficiency is compromised by this neglect by managers. This inconsistent engagement leads to dissatisfaction by team members. They feel marginalized when they're working remotely. They're perceived as being second class within the team. And that neglect harms overall team dynamics and morale and productivity and efficiency. What are the solutions? You really want to revamp your communication styles. So think about the platforms that you're using. Use email for formal, long-term directives that are going to be more spelled out, clearly written out, whereas instant messaging like Slack or Microsoft Teams for quick clarifications. So have that separation. And create a clarity canvas for project goals, which has online responsibilities and key deadlines, which is a form of a centralized digital information hub, which stores decisions, meeting minutes for various projects and takeaways, key action items, the status of various projects. Have easy access for both remote and in-office staff. So when people are working in the office, when they're working remotely, whether they're full-time remote or hybrid, managers, so that's what the Clarity Canvas is. It's a really useful tool. Separately, managers should establish office hours when they can be easily accessible and when the staff know that they can be easily accessible by Microsoft Teams message, by Slack, by voicemail, so giving a phone call, by text. Encourage use of these office hours, so have daily office hours, for example, from 12 to 1, where people know that they can easily reach you and chat to you. Also, you want to have specific days and hours for collaborative work. For example, you can have Tuesdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for team brainstorming or other sorts of activities. So have specific times of day for activities and have both in-person and virtual team interaction. So that can be team brainstorming in person, team brainstorming remotely, whatever it is, but that can be the time for more innovation-oriented activities. Other times can be for more collaboration-oriented activities. So whatever it can be virtual, it can be in person. A nice thing to do is having monthly team building activities. Even if you're working full-time remotely and you have the budget, it would be great if you do monthly, but at least quarterly. You really should be doing team building activities. And balance in-person and virtual events for all team members. So you can do with quarterly in-person events and then 2 times between the quarters. So during the months that you don't do quarterly team building activities, the other 8 months, you can do virtual team building activities. Now, team engagement strategies. To engage your team, you really want to know what engages them. So have some surveys to understand preferences among your team members and analyze these surveys for what kind of activities to do, both virtual and in person. Implement these preferred activities for engagement and have feedback on it. So ask people for feedback on their activities that you're planning out, on how those activities are going for them. Have quarterly reviews during those get-togethers for refinement of the strategy. And adjust activities based on team input, making sure that team activities, the social activities, the engagement activities align with the team's goals. And have a continuous process of improving the engagement and innovating. So having new team activities that might improve engagement further. And again, getting feedback on them and improving them further. So continuous improvement and innovation in team engagement. This should open up a new chapter in team management. When you embrace change in hybrid work communication, that's how you redefine the roles of managers for the digital era. So you want to prioritize clear and effective communication strategies, and you'll enhance productivity through having clearer communication. You want to foster a culture of open and transparent dialogue and recognize and adapt to diverse team needs in order to lead with innovation in team management and get those productivity and team cohesion benefits. Address the crucial availability gap of managers that employees perceive of managers when the employees are working remotely, whether full-time remote or hybrid. Transform communications for team success through embracing new tools for remote engagement. I talked about standardizing tools and using those effectively. Foster a sense of inclusivity for people who are working remotely and lead the way in hybrid team dynamics. turn challenges into growth opportunities, and commit to continuous improvement in your management, especially in communication, which we're talking about today. That's how you'll be the change agent in your organization to help your organization and your team succeed. All right, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you checked out the show and leave a review. It helps others discover the show and it helps us improve the show.